Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Here on this channel we talk about everything to do with the African diaspora. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Here on this channel we talk about everything to do with the African diaspora, politics, music, life, love and everything in between. So if you're interested in those topics, then like, share and subscribe, and remember to hit the notification bell so you'll be notified whenever I upload another video. So another week in, another weekend, lots of things going on. So today anyway, I wanted to talk about white fragility. So I'm reading this book. I'll turn it around, it might help. So I'm reading this book, White Fragility, and so far it's very interesting, right? It's written by Dr. DiAngelo, and yeah, I think I'm going to put a link in the description for you to watch one of her, readings and discussions. It's got over like 2 million odd views, so I think, have a look at it and let me know what you think. I found it highly entertaining, right? So anyway, I think the term white fragility is still really relatively new-ish. But for those of us who are non-white, then it's not new, right? It's not a new phenomenon. So I decided anyway to come up with a list of how, Black people tend to manage and deal with white fragility. So it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, so don't take everything too seriously. I'm not being overly serious, but then again, maybe I am. Okay, so one of the things I would say is that, for those who don't know, one of the things I would say is that dealing with white fragility is possibly one of the hardest things that non-white people have to do, and tend to do, I should say. You don't have to do anything, but it's a very difficult thing to do, and it's actually very exhausting. It's physically exhausting, it's mentally exhausting, it's spiritually exhausting, because it is everything you are not naturally, right? So I'm going to go through the list, and some of them you'll recognize and some of them you might not recognize, but let's go through it. Let's check it out and see what I've got. Number one on the list is, despite how a Black person feels, they will change or alter their physical countenance in some way, right? So, if it's a workplace, they will, if they're, how can I put this? If they're feeling quite happy about something, they'll tone it down a little bit. If they're angry about something physically, they'll try to release the tension in their body. They might shrink a little. They might, put their head in their hands. Whatever it is, right? They're going to change or alter their physical countenance in some way. If the person is quite tall, if it's quite a tall man, he's going to shrink himself. He'll find a way to kind of shrink himself in some way. Or he might sit down as opposed to standing with his, like if he's in a workplace, he might prefer to sit down rather than stand and sort of tower over, his colleagues then, right? Because at the end of the, okay, so the physicality, we know that the physicality of Black people tends to be often overanalyzed a lot, and if we were to look at the physicality of the Black man in America, then history has shown us that they are often seen to be quite dangerous and people that should be feared at all costs, right? So number two is that Black people tend to adopt a persona, and that is like character or a caricature, right? So there are several, but I've just picked out three. So number one would be the Joker. Don't accuse me of being that person. I'm just naturally like that. But okay, so yeah, number one is Joker. So the person that's never serious about anything, just always joking about everything, right? That's the kind of personality that people tend to adopt when they don't want to be perceived as any kind of threat. And I would say all of these personas are basically designed so that they're not seen as a threat. So it's also a protective measure so that people don't get too close to them, and also it's so that they don't, shatter any white fragility, because that's what we're talking about. So you've got the Joker, you've got the conservative one, the one that's quite uptight, always by the extreme difference now. Conservative one, very serious, quite uptight, very just boring, like just conservative. Or the ditzy. So the ditzy is the one It's usually the woman. So where you have the stereotype of the dumb blonde, so a black woman would adopt that persona, and then, you know, that will be it. Like, they don't know anything about anything, and, you know, and it's actually not true, but that's the persona, so as not to impact on white fragility. Right, number 3. Okay, so if it's a man, and he's in, let's say, if he's in a workplace, the man will tend to adopt a more feminine persona. So, you know, what he would do is he would try to shrink down his masculinity a little bit. He may prefer to wear more pastel colors, softer colors, you know, and just appear overall more feminine, and so that his masculinity does not, you know, is not perceived as a threat in any way, shape or form, right? I've given you the example of how black male masculinity is perceived in America. And, you know, you could argue that it's not really that much different here, right? So, yeah, so the black man in certain spaces will kind of diminish his own sense of masculinity, right? And we're talking about straight males, if that helps. Number 4 is that black people or a black person may decide to alter the tonality of their voice. So some people will call it, you know, taking the bass out of your voice. So, you know, if they're at work, I mean, most of us have like this work voice, and we don't use our work voice at home, right? So some people will call it code switching, but, you know, some people don't have to do that, if that makes any sense. So you wouldn't necessarily have to do that if you were in a dominant culture, right? If you're part of the dominant culture, you don't have to do it. You could be hardcore Cockney, you could be Scottish, you could be Irish, your accent, everything. Nobody's having to change anything. But if you are black, then you're going to have to, well, you don't have to, but black people tend to alter the tonality of their voice so that it's more non-threatening. It's more non-threatening and more European, you know, because that is seen as more acceptable. Number 5, they tend to dull their personalities. So, you know, a lot of us from the Caribbean, you know, we're quite, you know, creative, sometimes flamboyant. Listen, at the end of the day, as African peoples, there's more diversity across the African continent than anywhere else, right? So as people, we're very, very different. So some of us are loud, some of us are quiet, some of us are artistic, some of us are very studious, some of us are scientific, some of us are more practical. There are so many differences among us, right? So don't, you know, I don't want to assume that, you know, this is not black and white, so to speak, you know, yeah, forgive the pun. But many tend to dull their personalities when they're in white spaces. So if they're in a white space, they tend to tone down whatever they're doing. Even if they have a right to meet, you know, if they're in a public space and they want to make up a little bit of noise, you know, depending on the numbers, if it's not a large number, most black people tend to tone down a little bit, unless they're in a space where they feel safe to be themselves. Number 6. So if they're at work now, black people tend not to over-identify with other black colleagues. So, you know, they don't want to be seen to be talking too much to their black colleagues, or they certainly wouldn't want to meet in groups of 3, 4 or 5, you know, just in case they're perceived as some kind of gang or, you know, plotting to overthrow something. But generally speaking, this is something I've noticed over the years anyway, and I know this to be the case because I've actually had discussions with people who tell me they do that. You know, I've been in a situation where, you know, someone will be sitting next to their black colleague, and anytime they spoke, their manager would be like looking at them as if they're not allowed to speak. They weren't really allowed to speak. Everyone else was speaking freely, but for some reason, well, we know the reason, right? They were not allowed to speak. Number 7 is they tend to, like, this is for women, and women will wear European style wigs. So at the end of the day, you know, many women now will say, okay, it's just fashion and it's just fashion, right? But we have been socialized to believe that a certain type of hair type is more beautiful and more you know, more acceptable, which is why we gravitated back in the day, like my parents' generations, they wore wigs because, you know, they wanted to fit in. They didn't even wear wigs as much as wigs are being worn now, you know, but they used to press their hair. So I used to have the hot comb on the fire and they'd press their hair and they'd do it up in those, you know, 40s or 50s styles or whatever, go about their business. Don't get me wrong, they look great, right? But at the end of the day, women now, like the younger generation, they will wear these wigs because at the end of the day, if they're going for certain jobs, especially if they want to work in the city or in the corporate world, natural hair on black women is really not acceptable for the status quo. So if they want to succeed in their careers, they really don't have much choice but to wear these wigs. Yeah, so the straighter the better. Definitely no 4C type hair, and really it's so that they don't shatter any white fragility, so that they can be accepted, so that they can fit in and just get on with their jobs in peace. Number 7, my battery's going, bloody hell. Number 7 is, you know, black people can laugh at everything, even when the jokes aren't even funny. Like, black people would just laugh, you know, and they don't even like the joke. The joke could be on them to laugh, you know. Again, don't want to shatter any white fragility. Number 9, this one goes out to the men. They tend to leave their black partners at home. So if, you know, if they do have a black partner, if it depends where they work as well. So if they work in the corporate world, the tendency would be, you know, they don't really want to show that they've got like a black wife, or, you know, they would prefer to leave their black partner at home because the fear that their black partner might not fit in, they might not be accepted at the work function, you know, they'll stand out too much. So to avoid any of that, and so that they're not seen, you know, too black, then they'll just leave their black partner at home. And, you know, for some people, that's why they have gravitated to non-black partners, because it's just easier, right, to navigate through life, just to get on with life. Number 10, avoid the B word. So black people will tend to avoid the B word being black, at all costs. Even when it is black, they'll find something else to say. They definitely try to avoid the R word being racism, because, you know, they don't want to draw any further attention to the fact that they are black, and also they don't want to unsettle the nerves of the white majority within the space or shatter that white fragility. So this one is work related again. So this is they'll avoid bringing food from home. So they don't want to, some people don't want to be seen eating anything that's too ethnic, so they might just go out and buy a salad. You know, really they're hungry, but, you know, they just leave their food at home because they don't want people asking stupid questions, can I say, you know, oh, what's that? Oh, what are you eating? Oh, can you eat that? What does that taste like? So they just leave their food at home. And then, you know, I've known people, and this is like an Indian lady back in the day, you know, anytime she used to heat up her food, somebody used to say, it stinks in it, it stinks in it. So rude, but there you go, right? That's the kind of thing that people try to avoid those situations, so they'll just leave their food at home. Number 12, black people do to manage white fragility. They pretend to care about farmers markets. Black people in the main couldn't give two hoots about farmers markets. Most will shop at their local, if it's Wrigley Road or Brixton Market or wherever, you know, get their yam, their dasheen, their green banana. They ain't interested in no farmers market shenanigans. They'll only engage in the conversation if they have to, but let's be honest, most don't really care about the farmers market. And so what if you've paid overpriced, you've paid double for your carrots? Nobody cares, right? They'll even change, so they'll say things like bacon sarnie, right? I do not eat bacon, but, you know, they'll say things like, oh, you know, I just had a bacon sarnie for breakfast. Bacon sarnie is not in the lexicon of most black people. So if you hear them saying things like, oh, bacon sarnie, they're just saying it to fit in, because bacon sarnie is something they will never use outside of certain white spaces. Overwork. So black people tend to overwork, right? So And this is again to avoid shattering the white fragility. You know, sometimes there are things that you do and you find it quite easy. You could probably do it in 5 minutes. But for sometimes black people do tend to stay longer at work, do more than they need to do. And in a way, it's because, you know, we've all been told the story of, you know, having to be 3 times as good and all of that just to get the same level of anything. Do you understand? Which is absolutely ridiculous. But the reality is black people do tend to, and sometimes do have to, put in that extra because you're not, you know, more often than not, you're not judged by the same yardstick. So what, you know, as Jacob Zuma is finding out, right? So what one person will get away with, if you're black, you more likely won't get away with it. So where's this person's deadline might be extended, yours won't. So, you know, black people tend to overwork, and then sometimes that can spill out into their everyday life. Avoid touching products in shops. So black people will avoid touching products in shops. So if you go in, you know, more than likely you're going to be followed. They're going to, you know, maybe assume that you might be a little bit like fingered. So, you know, black people, when they go in, they really don't want to touch anything, you know, unless they're directly going to buy it. They will pick it up, put it in their basket and then go and pay for it. But they're not the type to, you know, you see some people that touch everything and they're turning it around. Black people aren't doing that nonsense, honestly. Just go in, get the stuff and get out, because we can't be dealing with, you know, the shenanigans of the shopkeepers. Black people never complain or discuss the way they're managed out of public spaces. So, you know, you'll hear stories where people will write in like it's points of view to their local councillor and they're this and they're that. Oh, and they complain about XYZ and they get this and they get that. Black people, I don't know if that they're just too busy, but they don't complain about things like, you know, gentrification, or when they are clearly being managed out of public spaces. And it could be spaces that they've kind of inhabited for a very long time, like Brixton Market, places of cultural significance for the community, and they're gradually being managed out of those spaces. Black people tend not to complain about things. Is that a good thing? I don't know. But it's just something that black people tend to just let bygones be bygones, because again, they don't want to shatter the white fragility and disrupt the peace. All right, so number 17. Black people, you know, to avoid shattering it's the white fragility, they'll say things like, I don't see colour, right? Diabolical, but black people, I know black people to say this kind of thing, and they say it because they don't want to, you know, they don't want to be seen as antagonistic, they don't want anybody to feel uncomfortable, and they don't want to shatter the white fragility. Number 18 is black people will tend to pull back, withdraw, totally disengage, right? So instead of challenging situations, sometimes black people will just walk away from it, totally disengage from it, because at the end of the day, they, you know, the risks are a bit too high. Usually when I say the risk, there's usually a financial implication, otherwise everybody will be cussing and everybody will be telling people exactly what they think every day. Do you understand? People will be standing up for themselves a lot more. But one of the things black people do to, you know, to manage white fragility is just pull back, just to disengage and give people their space. Yeah, I've forgotten what number I'm on now, 18, 19? Number 19, black people will deny their own feelings. So if they're feeling angry, they'll deny they're feeling angry. They won't allow themselves to feel their emotions, because usually their emotions are misrepresented anyway. So, and sometimes, you know, if a black person is feeling angry, if it's righteous anger or they have a reason, every reason to be angry, showing that anger is a massive no-no, and it often backfires. So, you know, black people will tend to just deny the feeling altogether, right? Don't feel angry, don't feel anything, right? So just walking around numb with no feelings, basically, until you get home. Black people tend to over-celebrate when white people do anything that is even remotely related to understanding their own cultural background. So, you know, whether it's white people playing African or Caribbean music, whether it's dressing up in African clothes, saying they love African food, black people will tend to over-celebrate that and act like, oh, wow, this is like, you know, the man landing on the moon kind of thing. And they will over-celebrate that, you know, so that they can encourage. It's not only to encourage, but it's to manage that white fragility. It's really good to show people appreciation, but I think over celebrating, I think that is counterproductive. I've forgotten the numbers, so I'm just going to go with it now. Next one, practice Christianity, right? Okay, so black people, in order to manage white fragility, they've adopted Christianity at great lengths and continue to practice it. I'm not anti-Christian. I was raised a Christian, but trust me, a lot of black people do find that Christianity helps them when dealing with white fragility. Email me about that if you want to. No, on second thoughts, don't. Next one, drink coffee. Most black people couldn't stand the taste of coffee, but they found that, especially in workplaces where coffee is like the norm, we've kind of adapted our taste buds to enjoy this ghastly drink. I still can't stand it. So I don't know if this one is just personal for me. It ain't personal because I'm not drinking it. But I know a lot of black people, I can't function without my coffee. I can't function without my coffee. Lie. What have you been doing all these years before you found out about coffee? You probably had coconut water. You understand? It's I can't function without my coffee is nonsense, right? Don't believe it. They're lying to you. I'm joking. Black people will avoid certain employers or applying for certain roles because they don't feel that they would either fit in or would be accepted. So instead of being rejected again, they'll just avoid it altogether, right? So these are any sort of employers that do seem to have a reputation for, you know, only promoting white workers or white employees or being, you know, quite white institutionally, then a lot of black people wouldn't even bother. They'll just go and look somewhere else. Never talk about race, right? So if you want to manage white fragility, you don't talk about race, it upsets people. Next one, you don't talk about whiteness, it upsets people. And it certainly, you know, can shatter white fragility quite significantly. Another thing I think, and this is the main thing that black people do to manage white fragility, is they don't reject the notion of an ethnic minority, right? Black people are actually part of a global majority, and the idea that you're an ethnic minority is actually quite insulting. If you want to look at it that way, globally, it's insulting, and it's often used to demean, right, and to devalue. So, you know, I think we should start looking at that, ideas around ethnic minority. Whiteness is an ethnicity, but whenever you think of ethnicity, you don't think of whiteness, you think of everybody else apart from whiteness. So who have removed white people from the notion of ethnicity? They've removed themselves, right? Historically, they've been removed from it. They've created it. So, you know, if you are watching me and you are black, remember this, you are part of a global majority. The best way to manage white fragility is if you feel yourself doing it, don't do it, right? Don't do it. It's absolutely exhausting. All of this entire stuff that I've given you, there's loads more, right? But I can say this impacts on your physical, your mental, and your spiritual. And after a while, you will just be plain plumb exhausted from it all, in need of more than a holiday. And you know what? Is it worth it? Is it worth it? We're not China dolls, right? We're not China dolls. Some of us, we've had to develop quite a thick skin over the years. And, you know, this helping to manage white fragility is only helping it to exist. We're really not helping anybody. So with that, I'm going to say, see you later.